I'm Dr. Helen Paul of the University of Southampton. I'm an economic historian looking at the British Empire and basically its role with enslavement. MoSaF stands for Memorial of Enslavement and Freedom. Well, MoSaF is a small community charity that deals with London as a slaving port, but particularly the Deptford area, which is where a lot of the original activities involved in enslavement happened. The original name of the community group, as it was then, was museum rather than memorial. And the idea was to get a physical building on the site of King Henry's dockyard, so the King's Yard. But we've now decided, really, we want to educate people, we don't want to curate objects. That's not what our skills base is about. So we can take people around, and it's interactive, people can ask questions, and they get a sense of the area and the connection between Deptford and its historical roots. England was late into the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Essentially, just English ships would be going and attacking Spanish ships, for example, and then stealing the enslaved people. The first, or one of the first voyages that actually takes in the Middle Passage, the triangular trade, is by John Hawkins, who leaves from Deptford. Now, Deptford starts off as a very marshy area that doesn't have much there. And then a big dockyard is built, the King's Yard, King Henry VIII's dockyard. So that's the start of this involvement in the naval system. And you get a maritime base there along that part of the river. So we're quite far down from the main Pool of London area, which is where a lot of the main activity was going on. Deptford then starts being really around a naval or maritime settlement. Greenwich next door is always a site of royal power. And the two together, I suppose, are part of that connection between the evils of the trade and then the money, the power that goes with it. Opposite, on what's now Canary Wharf, the Isle of Dogs, that area later on becomes used for major docks, investment in infrastructure, the West India docks, to take in goods that have been produced by enslaved people. Well, the triangular trade refers to the pattern of the routes taken by the ships. So you come down from Europe south largely to West Africa. When the slaving ship is on the West African coast and people are put onto that ship, forced onto it, then they have to spend several months at sea to get across the Atlantic. It would be really brutal crossing. There are very high waves and bad weather conditions in the middle of the Atlantic. And as well, of course, it was a disease environment on the ships. I mean, all the parts were awful, but the Middle Passage was particularly gruesome. So the ships themselves have to be sturdy enough to get across the Atlantic and large enough to be able to carry several hundred people. But then the more people you can cram in the ship, the more money you can theoretically make once you sell those people. So they used a system called tight packing, which meant packing as many people in as possible, often in very, very, almost like coffin-like conditions below deck. And of course, manacling people and chaining them up, using violence to control them. So it was horrendous. And then they'd end up in the Caribbean or mainland Americas. The ships then, of course, would be empty of people, but they would then take on goods that usually had been produced by enslaved people. So it could be something like sugar, tobacco, and then sail back to Europe. And this forms a rough triangle, so that's where the triangular trade comes in, and that's how the American side is connected to the African side and then the European side. And so for a long time, people felt that there was this plantation system in the Caribbean far away, and that there wasn't anything particularly visible here in Britain itself. And part of that is down to the idea that Elizabeth I had banned enslavement in England, that you could somehow magically be freed. And that eventually, many, many years later, became the source of a legal argument in a famous case where an enslaved person said, I shouldn't be enslaved. But in reality, having a law like that means nothing when you don't have a police force and you don't have any means of enforcement unless someone knows about the law and goes to court. And if you're enslaved, how are you going to pay for a lawyer, etc.? So in the end, yes, you cannot enslave people on English soil, but in reality, people were doing that, particularly around areas that were ports, because it was quite common for a captain of a slaving ship to traffic in, or indeed other people on those ships, or naval officers, to traffic in one or two people, often children, and then sell them or enslave them in the house. Queen Elizabeth's courtiers, there was a fashion to have an enslaved person, and you see that sometimes in artworks. With Elizabeth I, her law would say no enslavement, so essentially you couldn't have a slave market, a block in a small English town. In reality, we know that people put adverts in newspapers to say, come to this public house, and we can discuss this. But there's not a place where there's a very clear line between here are the enslaved and here are people who are free. That's actually very blurred because the law that says you can't enslave people is in tension with the law that says you have property rights. So which is more important? Your property rights or the person's right to be free? 1772, you get the case that says you can't have somebody that's your chattel property in your house in England anymore. That's clearly illegal. Somerset versus Stuart, sometimes I think known as a Mansfield judgment. The judge in charge was a man, Lord Mansfield, and he had to decide which is more important. And that's clearly on a knife edge there, but his judgment was that this issue of freedom was more important than your property, and you just could not enslave people. The next big date that people know is 1807, and that's when, in theory, Britain bans the trafficking of enslaved Africans. Basically, if you think about it, the sea journey, Middle Passage, is now illegal, but if you are already enslaved in the Caribbean, in a British colony, you are not magically freed. That doesn't happen. So there's then a very strange situation where you can't be trafficked in legally, but you can legally be held in enslavement in a colony. The Bible is used by abolitionists, but also by enslavers. And what we know is that there's a special Bible that was used for the Caribbean that was deliberately removing references to enslaved people being freed. So I think the Israelites being freed, that was cut out. Any kind of stuff about seeking freedom was removed, and that Bible was used to tell people that it was their place, God had chosen them to be enslaved, and that they should stay in their place. To go against that is to go against God. Now those Bibles, obviously heavily edited. So to the Quakers, some of whom were actually around this area, there's a very famous couple called Sarah and Benjamin Lay. These two people were Quakers. Then Sarah had been a preacher in Deptford. Sarah married Benjamin Lay. They went out to the Caribbean. They were horrified by enslavement. They tried to help the enslaved. They were basically forced out. And Benjamin particularly was a bit of a showman who went around demonstrating to people the evils of enslavement. And what he would do is he'd take a Bible, hollow it out, put red juice in it, berry juice, and then as part of his performance, he would stab it so that a kind of blood-like substance came out. This is someone that many people have never even heard of, but who predates William Wilberforce by decades. And Wilberforce is the name that's famous here. You get a number of abolitionists who had been enslaved themselves and then were able to write reports or to advertise what had happened to them. One is Equiano, Aloda Equiano, who was actually brought to Deptford Strand, so that's the river along Deptford, being told by a naval captain who'd enslaved him, "I will free you." But that was just a trick, because he was then bundled off the ship and re-enslaved, just sold off, literally down the river. So Equiano was here in this area around Greenwich as well, at a different time in his life. There was also another person called Charles Ignatius Sancho, who was actually born on a slaving ship and ended up being enslaved here. These are two people who were part of a wider group of abolitionists who were Africans who'd escaped enslavement in some way or another and then were able to talk about what had happened to them. Interestingly, later on, once Britain had decided to abolish slavery, once abolitionism had taken root, as it were, the US was still dealing with enslavement. And you got people from the US coming here to talk to British audiences about their experiences, including Henry Box Brown. Oddly enough, around Greenwich particularly, you had a mix of people who were abolitionists and also enslavers, that this area attracted both groups of people. Some are famous, so around the New Cross area of Lewisham, you get Thomas Clarkson, who's one of the big names. You also get people who were very much against any kind of freedom, who also lived in Greenwich, because it's an area that it's expensive now, it was pricey then, so that attracts that sort of person. Wilberforce and the other Anglicans, so that's members of the Church of England, were just one group, but they're the group that gets most attention in terms of the history books. There's been a rewriting of history to exclude a lot of people, and I think we're still discovering exactly how abolitionism worked, who was involved. We know about people who write books, etc., but what interests me, I think, is who helps the enslaved people who are living in London or in Bristol. When someone escapes, who's helping that? What is the ground swell of opinion? That kind of thing we don't know very much about. We do know of a case of someone who wanted to help an enslaved woman become baptized here at Greenwich, at St Alpheg's. There was a big long debate within the church itself, various churchmen saying, we're not sure we can baptize her, because if we baptize her, does that mean that she's free? We are only getting glimpses of this. This kind of research is still ongoing, and we don't know as much about it. In the news fairly recently has been Edward Colston, whose statue was toppled into Bristol Harbour. He made his money through the Royal African Company, the Royal African Company and the Royal Navy, and another company called the South Sea Company would work together to traffic people, basically. And also you'd get as well trades connected to that, like iron manufacture, the finance and insurance trades, again around London. And a lot of the wealthy eventually ended up around Greenwich. So it was a lovely place to be. That's why you get wealthy people coming here. With Colston's statue was torn down by a mob of people, essentially, and thrown into the harbour. Now, it needed to be fished out of the harbour again, obviously, and it was put on display at a museum in Bristol. Some people thought that was a good thing to do, but you also get people who came into the museum to see Colston in a positive way, in other words, to venerate him. So obviously there's a mix of opinion, but some of that is down to modern politics around the idea that Colston was a good person who was a benefactor of Bristol versus the idea that he was an enslaver. And that tips into ideas about racism and race. The far right often weaponize these statue debates because of this idea that they don't want to see any kind of acknowledgement that what happened then might have affected, say, the black community now, or that the black community are upset about this. If you're out and out racist, you don't care. So some of this is about racism, and some of it's about ignorance, the idea that there are people out there who really felt that Edward Colston was a good person because he gave a lot of money to Bristol. That money was blood money. And this is something called the cult of Colston, which is a real thing. In Bristol, they had an annual service in churches to mark Colston's birthday in November. They had something called a Colston bun, which was a fruit bun, a dried fruit bun that was given to children who'd go to these services. I mean, this takes a lot to overcome. And then when the statue goes in the harbour, there are people who aren't terribly well educated who think, oh, he was a good man. You don't learn history from statues necessarily. You are literally putting someone on a pedestal. So walking around London today, you will see infrastructure, buildings, etc., that have a connection to enslavement, but you often need to have some background knowledge to realize what you are looking at. So a lot of the infrastructure, the railways, for example, some of the buildings and institutions are connected. One of the things that happened when, out of all of the various connections to enslavement, one was that within the Caribbean itself, enslaved people were, quote unquote, freed. They were freed from chattel enslavement, but the enslavers were compensated, and they applied for compensation, given lots and lots of money to give up this ownership claim. They'd still have the same people working on their land, but they just wouldn't own them. And the money they were given, they then reinvested in things like the local railway, new railway transport infrastructure, etc. A lot of the activity around 2007 mattered here because it was the bicentenary 1807-2007, and that's where you get the Liverpool Slavery Museum. So it's quite late on in terms of building museums. There's nothing in London yet, other than a gallery, I think, in the Docklands Museum. The mayor, Sadiq Khan, has said he'd like to have a slavery museum here. However, we don't have sites of memory that equate to some of the places in the United States. And certainly some of the plantation houses in the United States have a very strange public role as places of weddings and other kinds of festivities. And we know, I mean, I know that certain places have not been very clear about the role of the enslaved people in building that. I mean, I gave a talk, and there was a lady who was obviously of African descent or Caribbean descent who got very upset and said, I'm from Deptford and no one's told me any of this. And she kept repeating that. This was someone who hadn't been told. The lady who's the chair of our organisation, MoSaF, spent her childhood in Deptford. She comes from Jamaica. Her name is Judith. Judith said, we're up here, nobody mentioned any of this. Sometimes the information is there, but it was hidden away and people didn't get at it.